Hi guys! Welcome back to the channel where we turn brutal slices of history into the perfect bedtime stories. Tonight we're heading to medieval Scotland, a land of misty glens, fierce clans, and relentless battles with war, famine, and plague. You'll hear bagpipes echo over burned fields, watch clan chiefs raid for cattle, and feel the dread of witch trials by cathedral firelight. If gritty tales told in a calm, cozy voice are your jam, please like the video, smash subscribe, and ring the bell. Then comment below what time it is right now in your country. My brave, resilient friends. You ease deeper into your pillow as the crackle of our virtual hearth settles into the room, and you let yourself drift northward, far past the wide English shires, over the Roman wall, until you reach a land where the sky seems to hang so low you could stain your fingertips in its gray. Here, Scotland in the Middle Ages greets you with a chill that knifes straight through wool, a damp that clings like a second skin, and a beauty so raw it almost hurts to look at. You can smell peat smoke curling from rough-hewn crofts, taste salt whipping off the North Sea, and hear ravens circling miles of purple heather. The landscape is stunning. Yes, but every gust reminds you that wonder and danger share the same breath in these highlands and glens. You take your first cautious steps onto this rocky soil and feel just how unforgiving it is. The ground is stony, thin on nutrients, and the growing season is a stingy thing, short, damp, prone to early frosts. You watch farmers stoop over wooden plowshares tipped with iron scraps, coaxing what little life they can from russet earth. They sow oats and barley because wheat is too delicate for the climate. Even then, hungry deer or a bad storm can wipe out half a crop overnight. When the harvest fails, bellies shrink, tempers flare, and the clan chiefs tighten their grip on every last sheaf. You sense the quiet panic that ripples through a village at the first sign of blight, a creeping dread that winter might finish what the weather began. Yet hunger is only one threat wrapped in these winds. You move among homes roofed with sod and woven heather, and you notice how the walls sweat with cold. Inside, smoke lingers at eye level because a central fire has no chimney to carry it away. Soot hangs thick in every thatch, blackening lungs before their time. Children cough through the night, elders wheeze by dawn, and you realize life expectancy here seldom scratches beyond 30 summers. When plague riders arrive, the Black Death, the sweating sickness, a bout of ergot poisoning entire families vanish between dusk and dawn. You see villagers painting white crosses on doors, praying to saints whose names they barely pronounce, desperate to cheat death for one more season. Still, danger does not lurk only in invisible microbes. You can almost feel steel humming in the air as clan rivalries smolder across every ridge. Loyalty here is blood iron. Each family shields its own, and insults echo for generations. One evening, you hear hooves pounding along a riverside track. A cattle raid. Warriors draped in coarse cloaks and woven tartans burst from the tree line, spears glinting under a ghostly moon. They seize the herd wealth on the hoof and vanish up a quarry before sunrise. By morning, retribution is already being plotted, and you sense how the cycle of theft and revenge fuels an unending storm. No sheriff, no distant monarch can police these brays. Justice is local, immediate, and often lethal. The violence bleeds into daily life. While you rest beside a peat fire, a woman sharpens her husband's dirk with slow, methodical strokes. Steel must be ready, she says, in case the neighboring clan pays an unfriendly visit. You accompany a shepherd across hills pocked with ancient standing stones, and he traces each scar on his forearm. Memories of border skirmishes that erupted over 5 stray sheep. Even joyous gatherings, like Lugnasad harvest games. Hire bards to keep rival groups entertained because a well-timed drinking song might distract young blades from drawing real ones. You realize survival here is a dance, one step in celebration, one in vigilance. And yet, you can't ignore the lingering wonder. At dawn, mist unzips across a glen, revealing a loch as still as polished glass. The mirror holds the sky's first blush like a secret. You watch red deer pick their way through bracken, antlers lit gold in slanted sunlight. You hear a lone piper somewhere behind a ridge, the notes rolling across water in mournful spirals. In that moment, the harshness feels almost intentional, like the land is testing its people, forging resilience from hardship. You think of how these folk will one day carry their songs, their stubborn pride, and their battle-honed courage into legendary stands at Stirling Bridge and Bannockburn. You see the seeds of nationhood forming, watered by blood and bound by stone. As you wander farther, you stumble onto a seaside cliff where gulls wheel over ruins of a wooden palisade. The air tastes of salt and iron. Below, fishing boats, really oversized tubs sewn together with animal sinew, bob between spray-slick rocks. Fishermen haul nets cramped with herring. Yet competition is fierce, and any catch delivered late to market rots before it reaches a buyer. You watch them gamble lives daily against riptides because empty nets mean empty bellies. The ocean both feeds and devours them. And you understand why pagan whispers about sea spirits still echo beneath thin Christian prayers. When twilight folds over the moors, you follow a torchlit path to a timber hall. Inside, warriors and crofters mingle on rough benches, passing a horn of raw whiskey, spiritus, smoky, almost medicinal. A bard stands before the hearth, reciting tales with rhythmic footstomps to keep time. He speaks of giants shaping mountains, saints taming wolves, fairies swapping babies for changelings. His stories blur truth and myth until the room sways in amber light, and you grasp how narrative itself becomes an anchor, a way for people facing constant loss to stitch meaning into their nights. Just before you drift back to your own century, you notice something unexpected: laughter. Even here, even now. Children chase each other around peat stacks. A mother hums while mending a woolen hose. Elders swap riddles carved on hazel sticks. Hope endures in small rituals, a sprig of rowan tucked above a lintel, a carved knot cross worn around the neck, a blessing muttered over the last scoop of meal. These are fragile rebellions against an indifferent climate and a brutal age, but they are rebellions all the same. You realize that survival here is not just continued breathing, it's preserving moments of joy, of kinship, of fiercely claimed identity. So, as the embers of our shared dream fade, you straighten your blanket and feel a quiet admiration settling in your chest. Scotland's medieval landscape has revealed itself as both executioner and guardian, grinding the weak but tempering the strong, offering breathtaking vistas alongside heartbreak. And you, safe behind your screen, but richer for the journey, carry away the memory of a people who learned to navigate beauty and terror in a single heartbeat. Their world may be gone, yet the echo of their resilience lingers in every gust that rattles ruined castles and every song that hangs in Highland air. Tonight, as you slide toward sleep, you hear that echo in your own pulse, steady, stubborn, alive. You wake the next morning to a pale Highland sun slanting through the smoke hole, and the first sound you register is someone calling you cousin, not by blood, of course, yet in this place. Kinship stretches beyond simple genealogy. As you step outside, you realize that the heartbeat of medieval Scotland isn't the harsh landscape you wandered last night, but the thrum of the clan itself, a living network that wraps every hillside in invisible thread. You feel those threads tug at you the moment a wiry herdsman nods in greeting, not because you've earned his trust, but because a guest automatically falls under the laird's protection. In an instant, you belong to something larger than yourself. And with that belonging comes both sanctuary and obligation. The homestead around you is no isolated farmstead. It's the collective hearth of an extended family that might trace its roots to one legendary figure, a warrior saint, a Viking rover, a Pictish queen. Across the yard, a circle of low huts crowds the central hall, each doorway painted with a different pattern of red ochre spirals, so every branch of the lineage knows its threshold, even in blinding snow. The clan crest, a boar's head clamped in a golden fetter, hangs above the main lintel, reminding every passerby whose laws rule this ground. You watch children dart between cook fires, their cheeks striped with ash from last night's celebration, and you notice how they greet each elder with the same word, mater or ater. No matter the actual parentage, blood and belonging blend here until identity itself becomes communal. Breakfast arrives in a wooden bowl passed hand to hand, hot oats, tang of goat milk, a plum of venison fat melting on top, a scarce luxury reserved for guests and honored warriors. As you eat, the laird appears, broad-shouldered, plaid pinned with a silver brooch the size of your palm. His eyes assess you the way a smith tests an iron bar, gauging usefulness, guessing where the metal might bend or break. In one breath, he inquires about your journey. In the next, he summons a young clansman to distribute tasks for the day. Drive cattle to higher pasture, mend the coracle netting, stand watch on the southern ridge. His authority feels absolute, yet your host wields it like a father more than a tyrant. Every order carries an explanation. Every rebuke ends with a rough pat on the back. You begin to see how leadership here is earned through a lifetime of settling feuds, dividing harvests, and standing first in the shield wall when rival banners appear on the horizon. Mid-morning, you follow a hunting party up a heathered slope, and the laird tells stories between labored breaths. He speaks of sworn oaths exchanged in blood, of fosterage agreements where children from once warring clans are traded like living treaties to cement peace. Each tale doubles as a lesson. Loyalty is the currency that buys safety. Honor. The armor no sword can pierce. When the party drops a stag with a single arrow, the laird insists the first slice of liver go to the oldest archer, gray-bearded, half-blind, but respected for decades of service. Rank here isn't fixed by coin or parchment. It's stacked like stones, one deed at a time, until even the poorest crofter can climb if courage proves true. By afternoon, the clan's legal drum begins to beat literally. A carved oak tabor booms across the settlement, summoning everyone to an open-air court called the Moot. You take your place on a grassy embankment while disputes are aired, a boundary stone shifted during the night, a wager over whose dog killed whose chickens. A brewing feud sparked by a drunken insult at the Beltane fire. Instead of distant sheriffs, the laird sits beside two gray-robed Brecon judges who know centuries of oral law by heart. Witnesses swear on a cross forged from bog iron, or, if they still cling to older ways, on a polished sunstone. The entire assembly listens, murmurs, weighs each testimony like black-robed jurors. Verdicts are swift compensation in cattle, a public apology, sometimes exile, but always public. And because every eye watches, enforcement is immediate. You realize justice is less about punishing guilt than restoring equilibrium so the clan can face winter as one body. When the court adjourns, the laird invites you to walk the perimeter wall, a waist-high barricade of turf and thorn. He explains that a clan is both fortress and farm. Its strength depends on numbers. Yet too many mouths can drain stores before spring. Marriage ties are brokered with the precision of military campaigns, forging alliances that knit glen to glen in a patchwork of mutual defense. He gestures toward distant smoke columns, Mackay's to the north, McKinnon's to the west, each a potential foe or ally depending on yesterday's cattle raid. You feel the weight of every decision he makes. A misread gesture can plunge valleys into bloodshed that lasts generations. No wonder the laird sleeps with sword and gospel in equal reach. Dusk slides down the mountains, and the clan gathers inside the hall for the evening meal. Torches sputter against smoke-dark rafters, where cured hides and bundles of dried heather hang like silent ghosts. A harpist plucks a mode so ancient you can't name the scale. And suddenly, the day's strict hierarchy relaxes. Warriors sit beside weavers. The laird's wife laughs with a shepherd who still smells of lanolin and rain. Stories flow faster than the ale how an ancestor once tricked the Sea King's daughter, how a raid recovered a sacred bell, how the laird's own mother walked barefoot through snow to plead clemency for a rival's captured son. Each tale reinforces a shared identity, binding everyone tighter than any iron manacle. You notice that people lean in when their clan name is praised, but they lean even closer when its follies are mocked. Humility. 2. Is tribal virtue here? Later. Outside. The night crackles with stars, and a sentinel's horn sounds across the dark. You see shoulders tense. Hands reach unconsciously for dirks. A lone rider appears. Bearing news from a distant kin group, English troops have been sighted near the border, and lowland barons whisper of new taxes to fund a foreign king's ambition. Instantly, the laird begins issuing orders: collect surplus grain, rally fighting men at first light, dispatch a runner to the coastal cousins for reinforcements. You watch the clan machine reconfigure with frightening speed, each gear slipping into place because everyone knows the drill. This is no simple village, it's a self-contained nation, ready to wage guerrilla war if required, all for the right to live by its own laws under its own crest. Yet before turning in, the laird pauses beside you. He places a hand on your shoulder, warm despite the cold, and tells you that clan life is more than survival or warfare. It is belonging so complete that a birth, a harvest, even a funeral becomes communal property. It is waking each day knowing whose voice will sing your praises and whose shield will guard your back. And it is the promise that when your bones finally rest beneath this rugged sod, your name will still travel in songs carried by voices not yet born. You sense how that promise outweighs every hardship you witnessed the night before, how it forges a loyalty fiercer than any feudal oath sworn to a distant crown. As you return to your straw-lined bunk, the hall's glow fading behind you, you catch yourself rehearsing the clan's war cry under your breath, tasting the syllables like smoke and honey. Somewhere in the shadows, an owl hoots, and you understand that tomorrow's dawn may bring battle, celebration, or famine. But whatever comes will be met shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in borrowed plaid. You drift to sleep beneath a roof you did not build, guarded by a kinship you did not earn. Yet for this brief night, you feel its fierce protection settle over you like a final, wordless lullaby. Roosters haven't even crowed when a sharp clang jolts you awake the smith's anvil, beaten 3 times. The clan's coded summons for a march. You throw off your plaid, boots still damp from yesterday's heather, and race toward the palisade where torchlight flickers like restless spirits. The laird stands in the half-dark, sword belted over his linen nightshirt, issuing orders as calmly as if he were directing the mending of fishing nets. A scout reported at dawn that the rival clan across the ridge lifted 20 head of cattle under moonlight. In this world, cattle might as well be coin. Their hooves measure wealth, dowry, and winter survival all at once. You sense the tension coiling inside every chest, either retrieve the herd or replace it with enemy blood. You are handed a short ash spear and a round targ studded with brass. The weight of the shield surprises you, light enough to slash with your free hand, heavy enough to turn a blade. Around you, warriors knot leather thongs through buckles, faces already striped with charcoal to kill the shine of pale skin. There is no rousing speech, no swell of martial drums. Everyone knows the stakes without ceremony. A cattle loss this close to Samhain could starve children and elders by February. Revenge is righteous, but survival is imperative. The column slips through the birchwood in silence, broken only by the puff of breath and the crack of frozen moss. You keep to the rear at the laird's bidding, an invited outsider, still untested in real bloodletting. As the sky shifts from black to pewter, you crest a ridge carpeted in blanched grass. Below, a smoke ribbon curls from your enemy's longhouse, and the stolen herd grazes in a makeshift pen, hawks glinting in pale light. You feel your pulse hammer in your throat, not entirely from fear, but a raw surge of purpose, an animal instinct tethered to the group. The warriors crouch among broom bushes, passing whispered assignments. 2 break the fence. 3 drive the cattle uphill. The rest hold the line against pursuit. The laird selects you for the fence team, perhaps sensing that stealth, not fury, is your best contribution. When the signal comes, a gull's cry mimicked by the lookout, you sprint, spine low, boots muffled in mud. A few well-placed kicks fracture the wattle fence. Startled cattle flinch, eyes rolling. You hiss and clap, pushing them toward the gap while another clansman whistles the driving call. The animals surge like a single shaggy wave, hooves drumming the ground, just as the last ox clears the breach. A shout erupts from the longhouse. Steel flashes in the gray dawn, and suddenly the air rings with the hideous clatter of iron on iron. Instinct shepherds you behind the largest cow as arrows thunk into its flank. The beast bawls, veering uphill. You dart after it, shield raised, lungs burning. Behind you, the 2 clans slam together, tartan against tartan, names hurled like curses, blades punching wood and flesh alike. You glimpse the laird trading blows with a brawny rival chief, their shields locked like grinding millstones. Sparks arc through mist each time their swords meet. Yet amid the chaos, you notice something chillingly organized. Fighters engage only those bearing the enemy's colors, careful to skirt women rushing to drag children and grain sacks indoors. Even in fury, an unspoken code governs the violence. Murder a non-combatant, and you risk triggering vendettas that make today's quarrel look tame. A horn note slices the tumult your clans call to withdraw. The cattle are already cresting the ridge, herded by boys too young to fight, but old enough to whistle and wave sticks. You turn to break off, but a foe blocks your retreat. Axe raised. His beard is braided with bone beads, dark eyes blazing with outrage. In that frozen heartbeat, you remember the laird's lesson. Loyalty runs deeper than fear. You duck the first swing, feel wind scrape your scalp, and shove the edge of your targ into his ribs. The impact stuns him. Your spear thrust follows almost by reflex, slipping under his mail shirt. Hot breath ghosts your cheek as he falls. You stagger back, bile and victory colliding in your gut. No time to linger, the horn wails again. Urgent. You scramble uphill, feet skidding on scree, until friendly hands drag you over the crest. Behind, enemy shouts fade into distance while your own warriors melt into the forest, steering the reclaimed herd toward home pastures. Only once the ridge lies 2 valleys back do you halt beneath stooped pines. The laird makes a quick head count, 3 wounded, none dead, then claps you on the shoulder with a grunt that says more than applause. You've crossed a border few outsiders ever reach. Your blood has mingled with clan blood now, sealing a bond stronger than any oath. But victory is never final. By midday, as the healer sews gashes with horsehair thread, and the bard composes an extempore verse praising the morning's bravery, you overhear hushed debate. The enemy will answer, maybe tonight, maybe next week, and the circle of retaliation will grind on until elders broker settlement. Or one side suffers losses too steep to continue. Sometimes compensation in cattle settles the score. Other times only fire and steel can. You think of the laird's wife, kneeling at the chapel prie-dieu, praying that her children won't someday avenge a slight that hasn't happened yet. Feuds, you realize, are inherited like tartan patterns. Each generation wears them whether they fit or not. After sunset, The clan rings the central hearth for a victory feast, but triumph tastes smoky, tainted by foreboding. Steaming platters of venison and barley cakes do little to lift the heaviness in the air. The bard's voice trembles as he recounts past vendettas, how the McGregors once wiped out 3 generations of neighboring kin because a single cow was taken without consent. How the Campbell banner flew over a razed village after a wedding massacre that began with an unpaid dowry. Nobody interrupts him. These stories are cautionary mirrors. They reveal how easily survival can curdle into slaughter when pride overrules prudence. Later, in quieter corners of the hall, strategies unfold. The laird's counselors argue whether to send envoys with token reparations, a fat heifer, a brooch, a promise on sacred relics to prevent escalation. Younger warriors spit into the rushes, eager to finish what began at dawn. You see both sides' reparations concede weakness, yet endless cycles of revenge bleed families dry. The laird finally decides on a middle path: dispatch foster sons as peacekeepers. Teenage hostages raised among rivals to stitch goodwill through shared upbringing. It's a gamble nurtured by cultural logic. Hurt a fostered child, and you insult not just a household, but an entire network of kin. You watch admiration flicker across weary faces. Leadership here is equal parts swordcraft and statecraft. Before sleep, you step outside. Frost silvers the thatch. Stars prick the dark like watchful eyes. And somewhere across the valley, a mournful horn keens either a funeral lament or a warning call. Distance swallows nuance. You draw your plaid tight, realizing the night holds more questions than answers. Will tomorrow bring trade and treaty, or flaming torches and revenge in these glens? The line between neighbor and nemesis is a single hoofprint deep. Yet, despite the uncertainty, you feel a reluctant respect for the stark ethics shaping this world. Every act, whether theft or generosity, ripples through generations. Nothing is forgotten, and nothing good or cruel goes unpaid. As you crawl onto your straw pallet, the laird's earlier words echo in the quiet. We are the stewards of memory. If we fail to honor it, the land will forget us. You finally understand. Feuds may scorch soil and hearts, but they also carve stories into the granite of collective identity. Stories future daughters and sons will chant when cold winds howl through the heather. Lying there in flickering firelight, you can almost hear those unborn voices, rehearsing tales of raids and reckonings, lessons etched in blood, yet somehow nurturing the stubborn bloom of Highland resilience. And you, a temporary guest, drift into uneasy dreams, knowing you too now carry a shard of that unbreakable memory inside your heart. Shadows still linger under your eyes when the clang of a handbell cuts through dawn mist iron on iron again. But this time, its rhythm belongs to heaven, not war. A traveling priest has arrived, the hem of his wool robe soaked with peat water, a silver cross flashing at his throat like a shard of winter sun. He greets the laird in the yard, kissing a ring engraved with crossed keys, and immediately requests 2 things: a hearth for mass and an accounting of the clan's unpaid tithe. In one sentence, he offers salvation and issues a bill, and you sense how faith here is equal parts refuge and revenue. You follow the procession uphill to the clan's stone chapel, walls thin as a sword's edge against the cold. Yet inside flickers a promise of order no feud can breach. Candles sputter along a raw oak altar, their light softening battle-bruised cheeks into humble masks. You kneel on rushes still scented with last night's blood and heather, and listen as Latin spills from the priest's lips, an incantation most worshippers barely grasp, but feel deep in the spine, like a drum that steadies wandering hearts. The priest swings a brass thurible, coils of frankincense braid with straw smoke, cleansing the air, or so the story goes, of devils prowling for restless souls. You watch warriors cross themselves with scarred fingers, each hoping yesterday's violence will rinse away beneath a few whispered prayers. Yet none mistake the bargain. Grace flows downward only if silver coins flow upward. When the offertory basket passes, even widows press copper into it. Knowing refusal brands a household ungodly, unprotected. Mass ends, but the priest's work has barely begun. Outside, he sets up a makeshift tribunal beside the chapel wall, 2 benches, a wax-sealed ledger, and a polished ash staff crowned with a tiny crucifix, the symbol of ecclesiastical authority. The laird announces that anyone with grievances of spirit must speak now. You soon grasp that this court slices where clan justice cannot. A farmer confesses breaking fast on a forbidden holy day. The penance is 3 days of bread and water and a single silver groat. A young couple admits they married without banns. The priest finds them a lamb and records their union in the ledger so future heirs can claim lawful birthright. Each ruling feels small, yet together they weave a net tighter than any sword arm the church keeps score in ink that never fades, turning private shame into public record. Mid-afternoon, a hush ripples through the crowd as 2 guards drag forward an elderly healer wrapped in a threadbare plaid. Her cheek bears a lurid bruise. Her eyes gleam with equal parts fear and fury. The accuser, a nervous girl clutching a wooden doll, claims the woman whispered curses that soured milk and withered crops. You catch yourself bristling. Last night, the same healer stitched your friend's arm and murmured a psalm while she worked. But the tribunal views familiarity as possible collusion. The priest questions her in Gaelic first, then Latin, demanding renunciation of charms and confession of communion with dark forces. She answers that herbs and prayers heal by God's design, not Satan's. The crowd shifts, uneasy, remembering stories of witches burned in distant shires. Fear, you realize, travels faster than reason. When the healer refuses to confess, the priest decrees an ordeal by water at dawn, bind her wrists, plunge her into the loch. If she floats, the devil bears her up and she will burn. If she sinks, she is innocent and God will welcome her soul. The logic is circular, closing like a fist. You taste bile, but protest would carry little weight, an outsider's voice against doctrine sealed by papal bulls and royal charters. That night, the hall's silence feels heavier than after any raid. No song lifts the rafters. No harp strings soothe the wounded. People avoid your gaze, as if pity itself could mark them heretic. You understand now why the church's power rivals the sword, because it weaponizes the fear already seated in every superstition-soaked heart. Dawn paints the loch pewter when villagers gather on the shore. Frost rims every reed. Even the sky holds its breath. Ropes bite into the healer's wrists. A stone is lashed to her waist. The priest recites the Athanasian Creed, voice steady as iron, then signals. 2 men heave her into the water. She sinks almost instantly, blade blooming outward like a drowned flower. Second stretch. At 15, bubbles stop surfacing. Murmurs ripple, some claim they see her spirit rising cleansed. Others glance at the priest, waiting for permission to feel relief. Finally he nods, pronouncing her soul received by God. In practice, the verdict matches a death sentence. In theory, innocence is restored. The crowd disperses, heads bowed, carrying away a complicated lesson here. Purity can be proven only after breath extinguishes. That evening, the laird gathers the inner circle for counsel. He respects the priest after all. Alliances with Rome and Edinburgh fortify Highland autonomy, but he also knows terror breeds rebellion. He resolves to shelter folk healers within clan walls, keeping their gifts invisible to clerical eyes. You see the delicate tightrope he walks, defy the church outright, and risk excommunication, inviting armies under banners of Holy Crusade, bow too deeply and forfeit the clan's ancestral customs. Leadership again proves less a throne than a balancing pole across a canyon. As winter deepens, you notice how religion saturates every corner of daily life. Farmers sprinkle blessed salt over frost-bitten fields, Mothers sew tiny crosses into babies' bonnets. Warriors scrape images of Saint Columba onto shields before patrols. Monks from a distant abbey arrive to collect grain tithes, towing relics in jewel-studded boxes, fingerbones of martyrs, splinters of the true cross, each worth a year of any crofter's harvest. For a coin, they'll let you kiss the reliquary, promising a year's protection against plague. People queue in freezing rain, coins clutched so tight they leave crescent bruises. You realize faith here is not optional. It's the sea in which every thought swims, sacred or profane. Yet for all its shadow, the church also brings light. Monastic scribes teach foster children their letters. A nun traveling with the abbey monks dresses a sword wound with honey and linen, humming psalms that steady a boy's sobs. One afternoon, the priest invites you to examine a vellum gospel ink, so fine it seems woven. Gold leaf, glowing like dawn, trapped on parchment. In that moment, you sense knowledge pulsing beneath dogma, a promise of worlds bigger than any glen. The tension between terror and transcendence feels like flint striking steel painful sparks. Yes, but also the only force capable of lighting torches in Highland's night. Snow finally softens the feud-scarred hills. In the hush, you walk the loch's edge, imagining the healer's unmarked grave beneath black water. Seagulls wheel overhead, crying like restless souls. You kneel, scoop a stone, and scratch a crude cross into its face before setting it on the shore, an anonymous marker for a life erased in God's name. As you stand, wind rattles dead heather stems, and you hear two voices overlap inside you, the priest's stern Latin and the healer's gentle Gaelic lullaby. The clash of tongues sums up this land's heartbeat, faith and folk memory wrestling for the same heartland. You trek back toward the hall, candlelight winking through slitted shutters. Somewhere inside, the clan's children are rehearsing a nativity play learned from the monks, while their grandmothers quietly pass down tales of selkies and second sight. Both stories will survive. Braided like river currents, shaping minds yet unborn. In the drifting snow, you finally grasp the paradox. The church's iron rule may choke wild roots, but it also preserves, records, and inadvertently spreads the very stories it tries to prune. And you, walking the margin between chapel bells and peat-dark folklore, carry both lights forward, aware that tomorrow's history will judge how you balance them in your own fragile heart. The snows have barely melted when the first whispers drift north on the same trade paths that carry saltfish and vellum England's king Longshanks. The tall one who drapes himself in iron has fixed his hungry gaze on Scotland. You hear the news in the chapel yard, where monks recite psalms meant to calm anxious hearts. Instead, every amen echoes off stone like the clink of manacles. By dusk, the laird summons the clan to the Great Hall. Candles gutter in the draught as he explains that Edward's armies have already crossed the border marches, sacking Berwick with a cruelty so thorough even the churchyard ran red. He reads aloud a royal edict demanding Scots lords swear fealty or lose land, titles, and God-given lives. You feel the mood crackle fear. Yes, but also a Highland stubbornness that war and winter have failed to thaw. Within days, you march south with a levy of shepherds, crofters, and half-healed warriors. Just enough men to call yourselves an army, and far too few to look like one. The church lends its own kind of muster. A traveling friar blesses each blade with holy water, promising St. Andrew's intercession. Yet piety alone cannot fill empty bellies. So you carry sacks of barley bannocks and hope they last longer than nerves. Crossing the moors, you see other clans converging: MacGregors, MacLeods, Frasers, each standard snapping in the wind like a chapter from a living chronicle. Old feuds are set aside, at least for now. Yesterday's cattle thief becomes today's shieldmate, bound by the simple math that conquest will grind every banner into the same dust. In the lowlands, you pass hamlets already scorched, timbers sagging like broken ribs. and you smell conquest in the air smoke. Tallow, something metallic and final. Refugees trudge the roadside with children tied to their backs, and when you offer a heel of bread, a mother weeps as though handed a kingdom. Soon after, a mounted scout gallops in English garrisons have seized Stirling Castle and posted archers along the Forth. The laird orders a forced march. Every step south feels like walking deeper into a wolf's throat. But retreat now would turn highlands into hunting ground later. At dusk, you reach a marshy bend where a narrow timber bridge spans the river. Campfires reveal a figure pacing its length, a broad-shouldered knight in grimy mail. No clan colors, just raw determination. Whispers spread that he is William Wallace, the outlaw whose name rides village gossip like wildfire. He addresses the gathered clans in rough Scots, and better silence the narrow bridge is salvation, he says, because it forces Edward's thousands to cross in trickles. Beat the first trickle, and the rest drown in panic. You expected oratory. Instead, you get simple geometry, and it convinces more than poetry ever could. Dawn breaks thin and cold. Mist hovers above the river like a drawn curtain, and you kneel in reeds slick with dew, heart thudding louder than the distant English drums. When the first armored column clatters onto the bridge, Wallace raises a long sword and holds it, steady as a mast against wind. You wait, counted breaths echoing centuries of clan discipline. At his signal, a downward slash bright as lightning. Highlanders surge from hiding. Arrows hiss overhead, finding gaps in English plate. Your own boots slap wet planks as you and 5 others heave beams loose, snapping the bridge under the enemy's weight. Men in iron plunge into the Forth. Screams twist with river roar until sound itself seems to fracture. What follows is mayhem blistered into memory. You duck beneath a spear thrust, feel oak splinters graze your cheek, then drive your dirk into the gap between helm and gorget of a man whose accent you barely recognize. Pain is the only shared language now. All around, clan pipes howl a war tune older than charters or crowns, notes that climb your spine and steady your arm. Wallace's banner flaps above the crush, the cross of St. Andrew crudely daubed on hide, yet it draws eyes like a holy relic. When the English vanguard breaks and flees, your roar joins every throat, a single exhalation of centuries' pent defiance. By noon, the river runs thick with armor and ash. The laird finds you amid the wounded, places a blood-slick hand on your shoulder, and tells you victory's taste is never sweet, only necessary. Then he orders the dead gathered, both friend and foe, crossing yourself. You help lay bodies side by side, because tomorrow's sun must rise on something more human than vengeance. The priest who traveled with you murmurs absolution, voice hoarse but unwavering, proving that faith can dress war's wounds even as it once fanned its embers. News of the triumph bolts across glen and valley faster than any rider, in distant kirks. Monks ring bells until ropes fray, in market squares. Crofters toast with watered ale they can scarcely spare. Yet celebration flickers beneath a sober truth. Edward still possesses castles, coin, and armies enough to bleed a country dry. Victory today means reprisal tomorrow. As you trudge north over rutted roads, you glimpse torched granaries that remind you how famine follows armies like carrion crows. Already talk whispers of a full-scale invasion, of siege engines taller than oaks, of papal bulls condemning rebellion. The church that blessed your blade could just as quickly curse your banner if English gold weighs heavier on Rome's scales. Back in the Highlands, the clan hall erupts when you recount the bridge's collapse, each detail sparking fresh pride. But pride quickly bends to pragmatism. The blacksmith doubles weapon production. The healer hoards herbs for arrow wounds. Shepherds plot safe pastures beyond burn lines. even children practice sling throws at cairnstones, turning play into rehearsal. The laird writes to neighboring chiefs, urging alliances bound not just by blood, but by an idea Scotland as something larger than any clan crest. You realize the land itself is becoming the clan. Moor and loch the new kinship. Winter descends. Ceiling passes with ice, giving you brief respite. Around peat fires, you study a leather map where Wallace's victories glow like embers sterling. Dundee, Perth, while ominous black marks trace English strongholds still gnawing at the borders. The priest, sipping weak ale, muses that even David faced Goliath with more than stones. He had conviction. Your friend counters that conviction alone won't break iron. The debate circles till someone suggests a pilgrimage to St. Margaret's Shrine at Dunfermline for blessings. Another argues for stealing English horses instead. Strategy in the Highlands, you realize, is a weave of faith and ferocity, each strand useless without the other. On the year's darkest night, the laird calls for silence and reads a letter sealed in green wax. Wallace has been named Guardian of Scotland in the absent king's stead. Gasps ripple. To many, a knight of minor birth now stands in a place once reserved for nobles and church-anointed princes. You feel the tectonic shift loyalty pivoting from bloodlines to a broader banner stitched by common peril. The laird raises his cup and vows that come spring thaw, clan warriors will march wherever the guardian commands, around you. Voices rise in unified assent, and in that chorus you hear a new note, hope tempered by the knowledge it must be defended more fiercely than cattle, more doggedly than creed. Later, alone beneath a sky brittle with stars, you replay dawn's carnage in your mind. Each clash of steel a question: can a land stitched from rival tartans truly stand against the most powerful monarchy in Christendom? Yet the wind off the loch smells of pine and peat, and something unnameable. Call it stubbornness. Call it destiny. You draw your plaid tighter, whisper a half-remembered prayer learned from both priest and healer, and feel the answer settle in your chest like steady drumbeat. This fight, like the faith that shadows it, will demand everything: muscle, memory, and the fragile courage to believe that freedom, once glimpsed, can become more than a battlefield rumor. You turn toward the hall's glow, ready to rest, ready to rise, knowing dawn will ask the question again, and that, whatever comes, you will not face it alone. The winter after Stirling feels endless, a season stitched from damp wool and restless rumors. Night after night, you sit by the peat fire, listening as messengers stomp in from the south with faces cracked by sleet and hearts cracked by news Wallace's ragged army shattered at Falkirk. English garrisons crawling north again. The Guardian forced into hiding. Hope, you're told, is a stubborn weed. Hack it down and it sprouts sideways. Yet each tale of defeat presses heavier on your ribs. And during long Chasium candle-lit vigils, you wonder whether victory was merely a fleeting spark. Bright, blinding, and gone. Then, one rain-lashed evening, a stranger arrives at the hall door wearing a crown few dare name. Robert Brewstall, raw-boned, eyes the color of river stones, steps into the firelight with mud still clinging to his boots. He has come not as a lord begging allegiance, but as a king already burdened by it. His first words are not promises of glory, but apologies for the hard road ahead. Guerrilla marches through bog and heather, sieges that will starve both besieged and besiegers, harvests burned to deny Edward's foragers a single oat. He speaks quietly, as if raising his voice might shatter what resolve you have left. Yet every sentence lands like the thunk of an axe into seasoned oak. By the time he finishes, silence has turned into consent. Your laird offers his sword, and you, still nursing scars from Stirling, find your hand rising too. Spring musters you to the hills again. this time in smaller bands instead of grand hosts. Bruce's strategy is simplicity, sharpened to a blade strike where stone meets thatch. Vanish where roads end. Let the English cart their ironmongers through peat bogs that swallow horses whole. You learn to march on dew-soaked grasses that leave no prints, to bank fires with green wood so smoke stays low, to read a falcon's cry as surely as a monk reads scripture. Nights become classrooms, Bruce kneeling beside a creek, tracing castle layouts in silt, showing how a single fire arrow through an unlatched postern gate can do what a battering ram cannot. Your world, once a chessboard of clan grudges, expands into a map of whole shires, Galloway's oak thickets, the mossy ranges of the Mouth, the tide-gnawed shores of the Firth of Clyde. Yet each small triumph carries a brutal counterstroke. When your raiding party drives English cattle out of Kildrummie's pasture, the enemy retaliates by torching 3 nearby villages. Crofts. Kilns. Even the chapel whose bell once told your childhood christening. You help carry soot-blackened beams from the rubble and find the chalice warped by heat, its silver now rippled like water. The priest who survived Falkirk weeps over it, not for lost metal, but for lost meaning. You weep too, quietly, realizing war redraws the sacred as easily as it redraws borders. Summer's height finds Bruce moving like smoke across the land, recapturing castles only to level their walls so no foreign garrison can ever reclaim them. Let the stone serve the hill, not the crown, he says, and you swing a hammer beside him, feeling every blow echo through bone and memory. When Edward's commanders ride to these ruins weeks later, they find nothing but cairns and nettles, a kingdom refusing to be a cage. Still, attrition gnaws at your ranks. Arrows carry plague from corpse to living flesh. Dysentery stalks the marsh camps. A single infected cut robs the laird of 2 fingers. Yet he wraps the hand and fights on. By 1314, word spreads that the new English king Edward of Caernarfon, unproven but well supplied, will march north with knights enough to flatten any rebellion. Bruce chooses his battlefield with a hunter's patience Bannockburn, where tangled woods hem narrow meadows and marshy burns slice the ground like hidden blades. You arrive 3 days early and labor until your palms blister, digging pits and planting sharpened stakes, camouflaged just beneath waist-high grass. Each stake is a silent oath if heavy cavalry charge. They will find the land itself your ally. On Midsummer's Eve, you stand in Bruce's circle of pikes, moonlight silvering helms and spearheads. A hush settles over thousands of warriors Highland crofters, Islesmen draped in sealskin, lowland archers with cloth badges of saint, Andrew stitched to their sleeves. Bruce rides a wiry gray pony down the line. No gilded armor, only a mail hauberk patched at the elbows. He speaks again, this time louder, but not of thrones or vengeance. He talks of homesteads that deserve dawns without smoke, of songs children should learn that are not dirges, of soil that ought to grow wheat instead of rumors. Remember, he finishes, we fight so tomorrow's plow replaces today's spear. The simplicity burns hotter than any sermon. And when he raises his axe, every voice answers not in polished Latin, but in the raw Gaelic cry of a people cornered too long. Dawn comes like flint striking steel. English drums roll across the flat fields, and sunlight flashes off a forest of lances advancing in perfect geometry. Then geometry meets mud. Horses flounder in the soaked ground, crashing into hidden pits. Riders topple, iron limbs thrashing. You watch Bruce's schiltrons porcupine circles of pikes flex, open, close, swallowing cavalry the way the bog swallows hoofbeats. Arrows hiss overhead, shattering on your raised targ, but you hold the line, shoulder to shoulder with men whose names you knew only as rival war cries a year earlier. Hours stretch into a blur of grit and heartbeat. somewhere to your left. Bruce himself duels an English knight who dared gallop too close. With a single downswing, he splits the man's helm. The sight ignites a surge through your ranks. You spear a dismounted soldier. Feel armor give under the thrust, and almost drop when you recognize the crest of a northern baron who once shared communion bread beside you in Berwick. War, you discover, has a vicious sense of irony. By late afternoon, the English line buckles, then snaps. Panic travels faster than orders. Knights wheel their terrified horses into fleeing infantry, and the field becomes a churn of mud, steel, and human will breaking like brittle ice. Bruce signals pursuit only as far as the burn, no further. No needless slaughter. When the last enemy banner topples, a ragged cheer rips skyward, vast enough to startle crows from the distant pine wood. You sink to your knees, knees that tremble not from fear, but from the sudden weightlessness of survival. That night, campfires flicker under a lavender dusk, and chants of Te Deum weave with Gaelic laments for the dead. You help the priest anoint bruised brows with river water, because all the holy oil is gone. Nearby, Bruce kneels beside a boy too wounded to rise and presses the pommel of his sword into the child's palm, a silent vow that sacrifice will not be forgotten. You understand in that moment that a nation is being breathed into life not by parchment or treaties, but by countless acts of witness. When you finally drift beyond fatigue, the earth beneath your cloak hums with something new, less a victory's roar than a horizon's whisper. Tomorrow the fields will still stink of blood. Famine may stalk the valleys. Edward will surely scheme anew. Yet tonight the stars seem closer, like torches hung out to guide farmers home after too long at war. You imagine seed grain tucked into calloused fists, looms clacking where spears once leaned, babies learning lullabies instead of battle hymns. And as sleep folds over you, you hold fast to Bruce's promise. Feeling it settle at your core, the plow will come. And when it does, you will trade sword for share without regret, knowing you carved the furrow where freedom can finally take root. You come down from the battlefield with calluses where gauntlets once gripped, and the first thing you notice is how quiet the glen feels without banners snapping overhead. No horns, no tramp of boots, only the wind threading peat-scented air through knee-high bracken. You trade spear for spade, thinking the shift will be simple. But the land disabuses you quickly. Every swing of your wooden plowshare sends sparks of stone against the blade, and the soil, thin, acidic, laced with stubborn roots, grinds your resolve as surely as any siege tower. You kneel, drizzle powdered lime into shallow furrows, and pray the sweetening will coax barley to take hold. The laird's promise that plows would follow swords rings in your ears. Yet you learn at once that peace, like war, demands tribute in blood and muscle. Weeks tumble into a rhythm ruled by daylight. You rise before dawn's gray spills across the hills, throat raw from damp night air, knees already stiff. Birds call curlew, skylark, the occasional raven, and you answer with a grunt as you shoulder the heavy ard. Oxen low in protest. They, too, marched at Bannockburn and still bear scars where arrows once found flesh. Their ribs show like wide bone keys under hide because grazing land lay trampled for miles during campaign season. You ration them last year's straw mixed with nettle to stretch the feed, promising sweeter forage when spring truly settles. The beasts do not believe you, but they trudge on, as if they, too, understand that stubbornness is the highland's truest crop. Mid-morning finds you bent over seed, thumb pressing oats into every thumb-deep pit. A traveling friar once told you each grain houses a miracle, bury it, and heaven will coax forth tenfold. You wonder if heaven knows the difference between miracle and gamble. Rain drifts sideways across the field, never enough to moisten more than the top inch. then vanishes in cold sunlight that never truly warms. By noon, you scrape earth from beneath nails gone permanently black and realize you have thought nothing of King Edward or Bruce for hours only, of how to keep worms, frost, and crows from stealing your future. After supper, if you can call watery kale stew, a supper you sit on a worn heather stool while the laird's steward tallies rents. Payment no longer comes in coin. The war melted most silver into arrowheads. So now you pay in labor and livestock counts. 2 chickens for use of the millstone. 3 days rethatching the hall roof in lieu of a penny tithe. The steward's chalk marks your debts on a slate board, and each mark feels heavier than a wound because wounds heal. Ledgers do not. Still, you bargain where you can, offering to mend fences for a widow whose only wealth is a single lame ewe. She thanks you with a chunk of goat cheese, hard as destiny, and when you bite into it later that night, you taste the salt of her own concessions. Hunger weaves itself into every conversation. Children chase rats between grain bins, cheeks hollow, eyes bright with the feverish energy of underfed youth. The healer, no longer the target of priests after Bannockburn's victory, stirred a softer mood. Brews nettle tea to ward off spring sickness. The weakness that creeps in after winter stores rot. You sip a cup and feel iron tang on your tongue, grateful for the sting. Yet no tonic cures the shorter lives etched into the community. A neighbor your age buries a 3rd infant in 4 years. Tiny body wrapped in the same scrap of linen passed between grieving mothers like a grim inheritance. He stands beside the fresh mound with a blankness that frightens you more than tears. You grip his shoulder, but words crumble before leaving your mouth. What comfort can language offer when breath itself is so precarious? Disease hovers like an uninvited guest at every doorway. A cough becomes a funeral within days. A shallow cut festers into black lines that trace veins toward the heart. You watch a grandmother dangle rowan berries over her grandchildren's cradles, muttering charms older than cathedrals, while the village priest swings incense through doorways, each hoping their ritual reaches ears more powerful than fever. You participate in both rites because no one can afford certainty anymore. Survival favors the eclectic. Still, life refuses to be eclipsed entirely by dread. Once a month, the laird opens his cattle pen for market day, and people hike from ridges wrapped in plaids dyed with lichen, cheeks bright with the novelty of commerce. You trade a brace of rabbits for a fist-sized ball of sea salt hauled from the coast. The salt is pink with sand specks, gritty between teeth, but it seasons boiled kale so well you swear you can taste Atlantic tides. Minstrels arrive, plucking battered harps, singing ballads of Bannockburn in verses already embroidered beyond fact into legend. Children chase one another through stalls selling candles, fish hooks, carved bone whistles shaped like owls. For a blessed afternoon, the glen hums with something dangerously close to prosperity. Then dusk rolls in. Market shutters clap shut, and the long road to winter looms again. You inventory stores 3 sacks of milled oats, 2 wheels of cheese, a crock of honey rings, while the laird's reeve advises culling another goat before frost wilts pasture. You nod, though each butchered beast feels like a chapter torn from next year's ledger of hope. When you lead the chosen nanny behind the smokehouse, she bleats in complaint, unaware this final contribution might carry a family past February's lean days. After slaughter, fat crackles on the hearthstone, and the smell resurrects ghosts of feasts from seasons when granaries stood fuller. The laird hosts a harvest blessing smaller than years before, but earnest. He invites the priest to recite Psalm 65, then gestures to the healer to chant a Gaelic prayer to Bride of the Hearth. No one blinks at the fusion. War taught everyone that survival thrives in whichever language grants mercy. The clan pipemaker plays a slow air, and couples shuffle in soft circles, boots whispering across rush-strewn floors. You dance too, arms around a neighbor whose husband never returned from Falkirk, and for 3 minutes the music erases debt, disease, and the threat of another king's ambition. Later, lying beneath a roof patched with turf and sheepskin, you listen to rain drum steady as a loom shuttle. You count your blessings, not in gold nor in bushels, but in intangibles, the way the laird lets widow and orphan glean stray stalks after harvest. The shared grindstone no one guards, because theft of tools feels like theft of collective future. The healer's habit of slipping willow bark under every doorframe just in case. You realize you are no less a warrior than when you marched beneath Bruce's banner. Only the enemy has shifted from flesh and iron to frost and hunger. And perhaps that enemy is even more relentless. Yet with dawn's pale promise, you rise again. You heft your spade, pat the oxen's coarse flanks, and walk the ridge where purple heather riots despite rocky soil. In the distance, smoke rises from other glens, proof of kindred hearts wrestling the same stubborn earth. You plant another row, whisper another prayer, and feel a quiet conviction settle. Kingdoms may rise and crumble, warlords may trade banners, but every seed that survives winter is a victory no conqueror can annex. In that fragile certainty, you straighten your back, drive the ard forward, and carve one more furrow where freedom takes its most patient. Enduring root. You wake to a wind carrying a scent you can't name, part peat fire, part wild thyme, but mostly the sharp promise of distance. It's droving season, and the laird has chosen you to help move 200 black-coated cattle from these stingy uplands to the faraway trysts on the lowland plains. The decision feels both honor and sentence a fortnight over boggy passes. Sleeping in rain-slick bracken, guarding hooves that represent the clan's winter hopes. Yet as you tighten the leather thongs on your boots, you sense something different in the air, an optimism fragile as a candle flame, but bright enough to guide the first steps of dawn. The drovers gather below the byre, each man coaxing reluctant beasts with whistles whose pitches could thread needles. You weave through the herd, palm on horn, whispering steady nonsense so the animals learn the cadence of your voice. Beside you, the healer's apprentice now apprentice to the weather, as much as to herbs hands out folded strips of salt to suck on the march. Salt keeps thirst sharp and spirits sharper, she says, and you taste its sting on your tongue as the line finally lurches south. Days stretch like well-pulled wool. You trudge narrow drove roads grooved by centuries of hooves, passing cairns that mark graves of drovers who never saw home again. At night you hobble the cattle in a ring, then trade stories with men from distant glens how the barley stood taller this year, how a new saint's reliquary cured a valley's epidemic of boils, how English merchants will pay in silver pennies instead of bar iron if the beasts reach market fat. Hope sounds the same in every dialect. You discover soft, hurried, afraid of jinxing itself. You fall asleep to the low percussion of cud chewing and the hush of heather brushing canvas, dreaming of coins clinking in a wooden till back home. Midway through the journey, news overtakes you the way mist overtakes a hollow, a sickness stalking the lowlands, black swellings blooming like nightshade beneath arms and along groins, killing within 3 days. Some call it God's wrath. Others mutter about miasmas leaking from marshes or foreign ships. You picture invisible armies marching north, and for a heartbeat you consider turning the herd around. But the laird's orders ring louder than fear trade must go on, or next winter goes hungry. So you press forward, each mile a wager between profit and plague. When the Galloway Plain finally unfurls, it feels like stepping onto another planet, rolling green, unmarred by stones, air laced with sea salt, market spires spearing the sky. Yet the tryst town greets you with shuttered windows and the metallic stink of quicklime poured into fresh graves. A bailiff in a waxed cloak meets the drovers at the gate, waving a white rod to keep distance. He orders you to bed the cattle outside the wall and waits while each beast is inspected for fever. Coin changes hands across an upturned barrel, silver ringing dull where laughter once rose. Still, the trade succeeds. Purses hang heavier at your belt, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a ledger page flips from red to black. You camp that night in a fallow field dotted with tents of other clans, all keeping wary distance. No fires are allowed. The town fears smoke might carry contagion, so you chew cold oatcakes, gaze at stars that feel closer than human company, and listen to coughing from distant bedrolls. Dawn reveals 2 drovers dead, faces waxen beneath plaid blankets. A monk pronounces them martyrs to commerce and sprinkles ashes over their bodies. You whisper a prayer you barely believe and wonder if the silver in your purse weighs enough to balance their passing. The return march takes a quieter route, threading birch forests where ravens hop from branch to branch like dark punctuation. You stop at scattered townships to trade salt and sea coal, and each settlement bears a different face. Of dread, some erect fresh-cut pine crosses at every crossroads. Others burn sweet gale branches whose smoke curls blue and useless against invisible spores. In one parish, a priest refuses to leave the churchyard, handing communion bread through a louver window while parishioners cup their hands like sparrows. You hear confessions rustle on the wind: adultery, theft, secret pagan charms, because people sense judgment in every breath now. Back home, the glen looks unchanged at first glance, but silence reveals what sight conceals. Smoke curls from fewer chimneys, and the mill wheel turns slower, missing the creek that belonged to the miller's eldest son. The healer stands at the stockade gate, eyes ringed with sleepless bruises, counting cattle and men with equal urgency. You press the heavy purse into her calloused palm. She presses a sprig of juniper behind your ear, murmuring that its scent confuses evil spirits. You don't argue the logic. Survival has taught you to welcome any ally, seen or unseen. Weeks slide by as the sickness prowls the glen's edges, taking a child here, an elder there, never enough to empty the hall, but enough to leave chairs spare at every meal. You dig graves in soil you once coaxed to yield barley, and each spadeful feels like a treaty between earth and grief. Yet amid the toll, something stubborn blooms. The laird opens the storehouse, distributing sacks of barley to widows before priests can levy tithe. The healer teaches youngsters to distill pine resin into a rough antiseptic, and their laughter thin but real echoes in the workyard. A traveling bard arrives, claiming the plague shuns melody, and though no one credits the theorem, they pay him in soup bones to keep singing. Trade resumes sooner than fear expects. Drovers from the Isles arrive with salt herring. Lowland merchants bring iron pots. Even Flemish cloth appears, dyed a red so vivid it looks scandalous against drab kilts. Hardship, you realize, hasn't crushed commerce. It has rerouted its arteries, making each deal feel like defiance. You barter a smoked haunch for a bolt of linen and picture it sewn into a christening gown for babies who survive this grim season. The very act of planning feels like a fist raised to the dark. But resilience invites new pressures. Royal envoys ride north bearing parchment stamped with the Great Seal, reciting edicts that demand the Highlands conform to lowland law. They call it unification. You hear erasure. Gaelic bards must translate their songs to Scots. Clans are told to send heirs south as guests of the crown hostages in velvet gloves. Even clothing becomes contested tartan. Once a badge of lineage is declared suspect garb that shelters rebellious hearts. The laird gathers you in the hall, parchment spread across the long table like an infection of ink. He speaks of diplomacy, but his gaze drifts to the broadsword hanging above the hearth. You recognize the calculus how much culture can be bartered away before identity itself becomes coin. In the end, the clan opts for a dance as intricate as any swordplay. Airs go south, bristling, bilingual, carrying hidden songs in memory. Tartan patterns become subtler, browns and grays that mimic heather and stone, cloaking pride in camouflage. The healer records herb lore in a cipher that doubles as psalmody, safe from inquisitive bishops. You marvel at the ingenuity defiance braided into compliance like iron into wool. Seasons turn. Plague burns itself out, leaving rings of fresh turf over graves and a generation that counts years by losses. Not harvests, yet fields green again, and the cattle herd multiplies. Calves wobbling on frost-crisp mornings. One evening you stand on the ridge, purse lighter now, but heart strangely full. Watching sunset bruise the sky purple. The wind carries distant pipe music, maybe a wedding, maybe just lads testing reeds, and you realize the melody weaves Gaelic turns with lowland lilts, old and new in stubborn duet. You tap your boot to the rhythm, feeling the ground answer back a thrumming reassurance that, though kingdoms dictate laws and plagues redraw maps, the land still knows your footprint. Tomorrow you'll mend a fence, trade seed oats, teach a child to carve a whistle. Small acts? Perhaps. But each one stakes another claim the clan endures. The culture breathes, and the future fractured. Tentative, but unmistakably alive, leans forward like barley heads in a hopeful wind. You know the lowland trysts so well now that you smell them before you see them. Tallow smoke, wet leather, and the sharp tang of iron coins jingling in an English factor's pouch. A season has passed since you hauled the clan's cattle south, but the rhythm of droving has already re-embroidered your muscles a steady pull between homeland and market. Gaelic hills and increasingly anglicized plains. The purse you carried home last time bought new seed, a fresh millstone, even a bolt of crimson Flemish wool the healer turned into a christening shawl. Prosperity, though, is never a single harvest. It's an appetite that grows the more you feed it. So at first thaw, you find yourself on the drove road again. Boots threading last year's hoofprints like stitches in an old scar. South of the Grampians, the landscape widens. Hedges replacing stone dikes. Dialects curling softer at the edges. You trade greetings in English now because it oils commerce, though at night you slip back into Gaelic beside the watchfire, reciting folktales that refuse translation. The beasts doze in a ring, breath pluming, while you and a lowland drover compare prices. He reckons Scotland's black cattle will soon flood foreign ports. Your rugged hills transformed into grazing engines, feeding English factories and French garrisons alike. You picture silver coins multiplying like salmon in spawning season. And for a flash, you believe him. But wealth has a way of redrawing loyalties. When you deliver this year's herd to the Falkirk Tryst, you notice new banners beside the weighing scales crests of lowland lairds who once kept aloof from Highland trade. They offer written contracts instead of hand-clasp bargains, quoting prices in pounds sterling rather than raw coin. Contracts promise stability. Yet one glance at the dense clerk's script tells you who benefits if a comma goes astray. You sign anyway. Thumbprint sealing parchment, aware that mistrust is a luxury fewer clans can still afford. The homeward trek feels shorter. Coin weighs less than cattle, but you return to find the laird studying a scroll stamped with the royal seal of James VI. It lists fresh statutes meant to civilize those parts beyond the Highland line. Summer familiar heirs must attend lowland schools. Bards must register or disperse. Feuding is punishable by imprisonment. New clauses bite deeper. All clan chiefs must build stone mansions in English style, maintain Protestant kirks, and send annual tallies of their tenants to crown sheriffs. The laird reads the mandates aloud, his voice even, yet you see his knuckles whiten around the parchment's edge. These laws do not forbid Gaelic outright, but they fence it, the way timber corrals once wild hill cattle. Summer brings inspectors' lawyers in black serge who ride between glens jotting notes into calfskin ledgers. They measure roof heights, record the number of hearths, even quiz children on psalm translations. You help repair thatch while one inspector asks if you can recite the Lord's Prayer properly. You answer in English, though the vowels taste foreign. Satisfied, he moves on to the next croft, never seeing the smirk you swallow. Outward compliance, inward refusal, the clan's new creed. To pay for the laird's mandated stone mansion, rents rise. Some tenants grumble, others leave, but most comply because the market coin does. In truth, trickle down new iron plows, better seed grain, a smithy roof that no longer leaks. You notice children grow taller on fuller bellies. Winter fevers claim fewer elders. Progress seems possible, so long as everyone keeps to the narrow bridge between identity and survival. Yet every bridge hides a toll. On market day, you overhear lowland merchants mocking your plaid as backward camouflage. A piper meets you later. Anger bright in his eyes, he was fined for playing a lament deemed seditious. Even the healer now mixes Latin plant names into her diagnoses to appease visiting clerics. Language morphs. Customs bend. And you wonder whether adaptability is strength or a slow self-erasure. Autumn fog settles thick the morning a royal messenger rides in, bearing news of Ulster plantations. Highlanders offered cheap Irish acreage if they'll relocate and serve as settlers. Some young clansmen, dazzled by promise, sign on. You watch them ride east with bedrolls and ambition, tartans tucked under dark coats. Their departure leaves fields short-handed, and suddenly every remaining back feels the extra strain. More turf to cut, more sheep to pen, more debts to cover when droving season ends badly. The gap between highlands and lowlands grows visible as the first frost. Lowland towns boast clock towers and stone bridges. Your glen still relies on sun shadows and ford crossings. Crown sheriffs measure progress by English yards of cloth exported, not by stories kept alive in winter keelits. One evening, after counting dwindling stores, you hike to the ridge where the healer plants her rarest herbs. She tells you the statutes forbid idle gatherings of storytellers after sundown. You both laugh quietly, knowing the next ceilidh will simply shift deeper into the pine wood, far from prying ears. Some roots, once deep, can't be yanked free without cracking stone. Winter solstice arrives with sleet sharp as flint. In the laird's new stone hall, the first Protestant minister preaches beside a carved oak pulpit shipped from Edinburgh. His sermon condemns papist relics and heathen superstitions, yet his final blessing slips out in Gaelic, a relic of his own island birth. Congregants keep straight faces, but later, over broth and bannocks, they repeat the slip with suppressed joy. Even reformers carry hidden cairds of memory. Not all adjustments pass smoothly. When a lowland sheriff tries to arrest a young cousin for wearing a broadsword at market, cousins swarm like hornets. Blades remain sheathed, but the sheriff's hat lands in a cattle trough, and he retreats, drenched and hatless, to submit a furious report. The laird pays a fine, cheaper than a funeral, but warns that next time the crown might send muskets instead of parchment. You sleep poorly that night, imagining a future where fines evolve into clearances, where drovers return to find grazing rights sold to sheep companies, where culture must live out of sight or not at all. Spring edges back with hesitant suns. You plant barley again, fingers tracing last year's furrows, and notice the soil seems slightly sweeter, evidence that all those lime dressings have taken hold. A neighbor drops by with news one of your clan's lowland-schooled heirs has persuaded his tutors to translate a Gaelic poem into fashionable court verse. The king reportedly smiled at the imagery. You consider the anecdote while smoothing seed into earth. Maybe bridges can carry traffic both ways. Maybe culture preserved in pockets can one day breathe openly again. When droving season returns, you set out with another herd, lighter in body but heavier in thought. At the Falkirk tryst, you trade for a leather-bound psalter printed in both tongues. It costs an entire calf, but you pay gladly, sliding the thin gilt volume into your satchel like a stolen ember. On the ride home, you open it beneath a birch canopy, reading parallel columns, English on the left, Gaelic on the right, and feel a curious peace. Each language tempers the other. Each line sings different shapes of the same hope. Back in the glen, you lend the psalter to the healer. She reads aloud at the next illicit ceilidh, voice-weaving scripture with folk melody. Children listen wide-eyed, not caring which tongue cradles the story. In their applause, you hear a quiet verdict. Adaptation need not mean surrender. And as moonlight flickers through swaying pine branches, you sense the future knuckling its way through present difficulties like green shoots breaching thawing soil, persistent, patient, and resolutely bilingual. You turn the psalter's thin pages so often that the gilt along the edges dulls to matte pewter, yet each verse continues to glimmer in memory. Children recite the Gaelic columns by hearthglow, then flip and echo the English side for the traveling inspector who swears he understands their proper tongue. In those evenings, you discover a quiet alchemy. The more one language is spoken to satisfy authority, the more fiercely the other is whispered to feed the heart. The book becomes a hinge, opening both ways, and you feel life pivot around it, half outward, half inward, never quite still. The seasons spin, and with them the trade roads lengthen. A new turnpike slices through moorland heather, its gravel packed by soldiers who mutter that smoother routes will tame highland tempers. You march droves along it all the same, hooves striking sparks from stone, wondering whether iron-shod order might eventually wear thin under so many uncivil footsteps. At every toll booth, an exciseman demands a penny and a promise of peace. You pay the coin, but keep your silence on the second point. Behind your lips rests an oath older than parchment. Back home, you help raise the laird's stone mansion turrets, mullioned windows, a front stair broad enough for two ladies' hoop skirts to pass without brushing. Lime dust cakes your palms, while lowland masons debate angles in Scots you barely grasp. The finished walls gleam pale against rain-dark hills, a lighthouse of compliance meant to signal loyalty to the king. Yet when dusk settles, the laird's mother insists on setting a rushlight in the ancient turf-roofed longhouse where clan chiefs once decided war and marriage. She claims the old hall guides ancestral spirits, and even the new minister nods, as if architecture can stretch backward to appease stubborn ghosts. On Sunday mornings, you file into the Protestant kirk, its benches arranged in neat rows like drilled pikes. Psalms drift upward, but sometimes, in the rests between verses, you catch an elder humming a lilting keening tune no psalter ever printed. The minister coughs and raises the pitch pipe, yet the tune lingers, a scent of peat among candle wax. Faith, you learn, can be tailored like cloth cut to royal pattern on the outside, lined with secret tartan beneath the seams. A year of good rain fattens barley heads and swells cattle prices. Silver pennies rattle in clan coffers. enough to send 3 promising lads to Edinburgh's college, where they will learn law, Latin, and the polished accent rumored to unlock doors at court. You watch them ride off in cloaks of lowland gray, salters tucked beside inkpots, and you pray the city's cobbles won't rub the highlands from their souls. Before leaving, one boy presses a bundle into your hand. He has copied herbal notes from the healer's cipher and vows to share them with urban physicians so they'll know real medicine. The gesture feels like a pledge that knowledge, once traded, can still carry homeward seeds. Prosperity arrives like a guest who can't decide whether to stay, just as wheat replaces oat on the laird's table. A royal proclamation levies a new hearth tax to fund distant wars. The mansion's many chimneys now burn hotter in the ledger than in the winter cold, and rents creep upward again. Some tenants sell what little they own, migrating to coastal towns where weaving sheds clack day and night, powered by water wheels turning faster than any clan feud ever did. On market day, you meet former neighbors with soot-ringed eyes, their accents softened by soot and shilling, and you see how quickly stone mansions can cast migrating shadows. Rumors ride every mail carrier covenanters in the southwest, daring the king over liturgy. Lowland landlords fencing common moors to fatten specialized sheep. Dutch ships paying triple for oak masts and quadruple for black cattle tallow. The world beyond the glen feels both threatening and irresistibly profitable. So when the laird proposes exporting hides directly to Amsterdam, you volunteer for the coastal caravan. The journey shows you horizons saltier and wider than any inland ridge harbors crammed with rigging. Taverns humming in 3 languages. Dockyards where Highland beef is boiled into barrel grease for East India voyages. You haggle with merchants who care nothing for tartan or psalm, only weight and price. And you find that this indifference can feel oddly freeing, a space where clan history does not immediately precede your name. Yet the moment you step off the pier, the same indifference chills. A lowland factor calls you Highland fellow in a tone that weighs fellowship against barbarity and finds it wanting. You answer in flawless English, offer your tally slips, and watch his eyebrows rise. Still, he counts the coins twice. Trust, like language, remains under negotiation. Winter follows you inland, cutting a frigid swath across the drove roads. Snow muffles hoofbeats, and wolf prints appear near the hill pass for the first time in years. One night your party shelters in an abandoned shieling whose thatch has sunken under storms. Inside, someone finds charcoal sketches on a soot-black wall, coils of knotwork, a deer leaping, words in Gaelic prayer script. The drawings are old enough to precede the statutes, young enough for you to read. You trace a curve with gloved fingers and feel a pulse, proof that art, outlawed or not, finds shelter in corners the law forgets. When you reach the glen, the new minister waits with unsettling news. Edinburgh has decreed a survey of idle customs to be eradicated. Pipe music at wakes tops the list, followed by handfast weddings and midsummer fires. You recall the boys dancing round last June's blaze, their shadows flinging arm in arm against twilight, and you wonder what cold replaces heat once the fires go dark. The healer murmurs that every ban births a workaround. She already teaches girls to weave sunwheel symbols into belts hidden beneath skirts. Resistance, she says, can be soft as linen, yet strong as spun horsehair. Spring returns. Lime trees budding bright against stone facades, never meant for color. You clamber onto the mansion's new parapet and glimpse 3 musketeers marching along the distant turnpike. New royal patrols ensuring statute compliance. They look small as tin soldiers from this height, but their muskets can still stitch history into flesh. The laird joins you, gray in beard but iron in jaw. and confides that he's sending another delegation south, not with protest, but with poetry translations of clan bards rendered into courtly fashion. Set to lowland lute arrangements. If they crave polish, he says, we'll polish our truth until it blinds them. You can't decide whether the strategy is brilliance or surrender, but you volunteer to escort the manuscripts anyway. Better that the message travel with someone who knows every dialect it was born from. On the eve of departure, the clan gathers for a quietly rebellious Kaili deep among ancient pines. A single lantern glows warm in the windless dark, illuminating faces painted with equal parts hope and fatigue. The piper begins a tune, a slow air that swells into a reel, and before long boots stamp mossy earth. Skirts flare. Voices braid English chorus with Gaelic verse. The minister joins. Clapping time. The healer's apprentice slips juniper berries into pockets for luck. You dance, sensing the music carve invisible runes into the air, and realize this night is not merely farewell, but declaration. Culture does not live in statutes or mansions. It lives in muscle memory, in calluses that know both plow and dirk, in a psalter's fading gilt passed hand to eager hand. When dawn seeps through pine crowns, you shoulder the manuscript satchel, its pages fluttering like resting wings. The path south is long, the crown's pen sharp, and the future a territory still contested. Yet as you step onto the turnpike, you hear last night's melody echo in your pulse, steady as hoofbeats, stubborn as seed pushing through stubborn highland soil. Whatever the road demands, you carry more than parchment. You carry an inheritance too agile to be fenced, too resonant to be silenced, ready to rewrite itself, line by bilingual line, every mile of the way. The road to Edinburgh takes you through a patchwork of new enclosures, tidy hedges stitching green velvet into parcels where open grazing once sprawled. Each mile south tugs you farther from the scent of peat and wood smoke. Yet the pine shade Salic tune still thrums in your pulse, propelling you past toll booths and watch posts until the city's spires spear the gray horizon. You arrive at the Netherbow Gate long before sunrise and smell coal stoves and tidal mud mixing in the dawn fog. A porter eyes your weather-stained plaid as though it were a half-translated riddle, then waves you through when he notices the satchel sealed with the Laird's crest parchment trumps tartan in this capital of charter and decree. Edinburgh feels like a vertical argument with the sky. Tenement closes climb 8, 9 stories, each window spilling dishwater and gossip onto the wines below. The manuscripts in your care seem almost weightless compared to the city's stone. Yet when you reach the advocate's library, the clerk who receives them treats the bundle like a sacred relic. He breaks a wax seal, skims a poem about dawn over Rannoch Moor, and blinks as if a window opened in his skull. For a moment, you glimpse possibility Gaelic words breathing inside polished court meter, Highland cadence rippling beneath lowland rhyme. Then he clears his throat, notes your accent, and assures you they will be evaluated for their literary merit. You recognize the phrase as both courtesy and cage, so you thank him and leave before courtesy wears thin. With the Laird's errands done, you have time to wander the Canongate markets. You watch Flemish dyers hawk scarlet wool. Aberdonian students argue Latin conjugations beside barrels of salt herring. And Highland drovers your own mirror world shuffling sheep past goldsmith stalls. Languages collide in every alley clipped English. Rolling Scots. Lilting Gaelic. All elbowing for air. Yet when a street fiddler slides into flowers of the forest, heads turn, hats lift, and coins clink. Grief doesn't need translation. You drop a penny into the violin case and feel a surge of homesickness so sharp it surprises you. The city dazzles, but it also dilutes, and you suddenly understand why the Laird sent someone who can serve as both courier and anchor. Your lodging is a cramped garret overlooking the Nor Loch. Stagnant, defensive, stinking. At night you lie awake listening to city sounds, the hammer of a distant print shop, the drunk hymn of students, the creak of gallows timbers whenever a wind gust swings the empty noose. Sleep comes late, fractured by dreams in which pages sprout wings and fly north without you. When dawn finally seeps through frost-etched glass, you pull on boots and set off for the print shop, whose presses, rumor says, can birth 1,000 broadsheets in a day. If the court ignores the laird's leather-bound diplomacy, perhaps broadside ballads will carry Highland voices straight into tavern talk. The printer, a burly man with ink-black fingernails, squints at your sample page. Gaelic type's no good on my iron, he warns, but we can set you a dual column. Scots one side, Gaelic the other. Readers love riddles. You haggle over cost, finally barter 2 cowhides and a promise of future large shipments. By afternoon, lead slugs clack into wooden frames, and the first sheet slips off the press, a poem about hill mist and returning sun. English and Gaelic, shoulder to shoulder like uneasy cousins. You grin, ink smudging your thumb proof that adaptation can be hammered into metal as surely as law. A week later, the broadside circulates from Cowgate alehouses to St. Tut's, Giles's porch steps. You trail its progress, eavesdropping on debates it sparks. Some readers scoff at the rustic muse, yet others trace Gaelic lines aloud, savoring unfamiliar vowels, as if tasting salt for the first time. A university tutor corners you in a close and demands more text's material for linguistic comparison. He says, but his eyes shine with something warmer than scholarly hunger. You promise to send songs of harvest and herding, and he presses a silver shilling into your palm. Early proof that culture can earn coin without losing its soul. Letters start arriving at your garret, one from a Glasgow bookseller seeking volumes of Highland lore for urban customers longing for authentic quaintness. Another from a lowland minister requesting hymns set to those lovely pentatonic airs. You sort each request into piles, profit. Propaganda. Genuine curiosity, unsure which stack matters most. Then a sealed scroll appears from the Privy Council itself, summoning you to present the laird's case before a panel of nobles. The hearings, you learn, will shape new regulations on language instruction in parish schools. Suddenly, the manuscripts feel heavier than when you first slung them over your shoulder. The council chamber reeks of wax and warmed wine. Lords in starched ruffs recline like carved lions, while scribes scratch every syllable. You stand in plain plaid, pulse drumming your ribs, and read a translated verse about stags crossing a frozen loch. When you finish, silence spreads too long, too wide until one baron clears his throat and asks why children should learn wild mountain speech when commerce flows in English. You reply that trade loves profit, and profit loves novelty. That memory stitched in 2 tongues is stronger than in one. That unity built from erasure will crumble when new storms come. You expect rebuke, maybe laughter, but another lord, hair powdered so white it resembles Cairngorm snow, requests the original Gaelic line. Your voice fills the rafters, low and steady. And when the echo dies, no one moves for a full breath. The clerk finally notes, debate adjourned for further study. It isn't victory, but it isn't defeat. Weeks crawl as committees fillet your arguments. You bide time by visiting the college where the laird's protégés now debate Virgil and Euclid. They greet you with city-polished tongues but slip into Gaelic once the tutor leaves proof that new varnish hasn't stripped old grain. One evening, they bring you to a secret society of students. Lowland and Highland both, who read banned tracts by continental reformers and recite ossianic fragments by candlelight. Their passion glows hotter than any statue in the quadrangle. And you walk home beneath a swarming sky, thinking the future might survive after all, if guided by such stubborn stars. Then news gallops north of civil strife in England Parliament, raising arms against the Stuart king. Edinburgh buzzes with rumours levies, loans, possible invasion. The city's confidence tilts. Presses print both propaganda and pleas for calm. You weigh staying to push the language cause deeper into policy against returning home before roads bristle with muskets. The decision tilts when the printer hands you a final stack of freshly inked broadsides, your last commission. A set of Highland proverbs translated into brisk, memorable English. "Take them," he says, wiping ink from his brow. "They'll travel farther than we can right now." You pack the sheets beside the Psalter and turn north, hiring a seat in a wagon already crowded with refugees, traders, and one silent soldier clutching a pike twice his height. As the city walls recede, you feel tension ease from your spine. But another weight settles the knowledge that homecoming is never a return to the same hearth. Roads change travelers as surely as travelers change roads. Yet when the first sweep of heather scents the air, that pine shade melody resurfaces, steadying you like a compass. The glen greets you with lambs bleating, peat smoke curling, and a laird whose beard is grayer, but whose smile cracks the same way, half relief, half question. You unload manuscripts, broadsides, news of looming war, and promises from scholars intrigued by Highland verse. Around the longhouse table, elders argue, some say prepare stores and hide weapons. Others claim language will shield them better than steel. You spread the printed proverbs across the boards, ink still smelling of Edinburgh iron, and watch calloused fingers trace bilingual lines. The healer lifts one sheet, reads aloud a saying about rivers finding the sea despite rocks, and the room falls quiet. You realize in that hush that words, once launched, sail currents beyond any single shore. Night deepens. You step outside, tilt your face to a sky brushed clean by northern wind, and feel the manuscripts, the Psalter, and the broadsides merging inside you like tributaries. Storms are coming, political, military, maybe spiritual. But the clan now owns tools forged in city presses and tempered in glen fires. Whatever havoc barrels down the turnpike, the bridge between tongues will hold, plank by translated plank, and as moonlight silver plates the ridge, you sense a vow settling in your chest to keep walking that bridge, guiding others across, until the route feels as natural as breath and as enduring as the hills that first taught you how to listen. You scarcely unpack your satchel before the first crack of muskets echoes across the southern ridge, yanking you from the fragile calm you carried home. Word flies faster than riders' covenant banners have risen. Royal dragoons thunder north, and the glen, balanced between tongues and statutes only yesterday, now teeters on the edge of open war. You watch the laird read a broadside nailed to the kirk door scripture laced with steel and feel the air sharpen, the way heather prickles before an electric storm. Old oaths, half forgotten since Bannockburn, spark awake in every spine when kings quarrel, valleys burn. Within a fortnight, the glen's men muster beneath mismatched colors, some stitched with thistles, others with the king's cross. Many blank because allegiance shifts daily with rumor. You're named provisioner, tasked with gathering carts of oatcakes, salt beef, and the healer's dwindling jars of willow bark. As you inventory stores, each sack becomes a gamble feed, fighters now or children later. You weigh barley against bullets, hope against hunger, and still the columns march out, boots chewing ruts into newly thawed fields. The first skirmish flares near a barley meadow you limed last spring. Royal horsemen fan out like dark sails, sabers catching low sun, while covenant pikemen crouch amid tender shoots. Within minutes, the crop you nursed from sour soil lies flattened beneath corpses and churned mud. Smoke rolls over the stubble, and the stench of iron clogs your throat. When silence finally settles, nothing moves except a wounded thrush fluttering one broken wing where heads of grain should have ripened. You kneel, crush a handful of blackened earth, and understand how quickly a season's labor can turn to ash. Raids follow raids. One night Covenanters torched the laird's cattle buyer to deny beef to the king. 3 nights later, Royalists burn the Covenanting smithy in retaliation. Each blaze paints the sky blood orange, and each morning reveals new boundaries of lost charred rafters, singed sheep wool drifting like gray snow, widows staring at empty doorframes where husbands carried muskets they'd never fired before. Hunger creeps in on boots of its own, wells foul with soot, milling stones crack from rain-turned ice, and stores you thought would last 6 months vanish in 4. The healer stretches pine needle broth into medicine, but starvation steals faster than fever. Amid the chaos, church bells ring every dawn, summoning repentance almost indistinguishable from surrender. Ministers preach that judgment rides on cannon smoke. Flagellant friars wander barefoot, lashing shoulders raw to forfeit divine wrath. Yet for every sermon of doom, another voice rises in stubborn hymn. On one ragged Sunday, you stand beside neighbors who sing the doxology in Gaelic, psalm tune trembling but unbroken, while royal scouts lurk beyond the kirkyard. The harmony feels like a fence woven of breath and faith, thin but holding. Winter clamps down harder than any statute. Snow conceals burned pastures, but it cannot hide the vacancy in byres and granaries. Oatcakes shrink to wafers, broth to cloudy water. You learn to boil lichen scraped from stone, to trap field mice, to brew a tea of pine bark that staves off scurvy. Children's eyes grow too large for their faces, and men trade belts for rope to cinch shrinking waists. Still, drums echo from distant passes, and every able body is summoned to yet another field where rival standards bleed into the same sleet-gray horizon. When spring finally returns, it feels fragile, a rumor in green. You and the healer walk ridge after ridge sowing what seed survived vermin and frost, pushing fingers into soil still clotted with musket balls. Some evenings, royal patrols ride past tired lads in tarnished cuirasses too hungry to pillage, too lost to enforce decrees. They accept bowls of parritch from women whose sons they may have killed, then trudge on, ghosts wearing flesh. War, you realize, forgets its flags long before it forgets its hunger. By midsummer, peace rumors flutter through the glen like hesitant swallows. Parliament has signed a treaty. The king has fled. The army is disbanding. No one cheers. Voices cracked by grief cannot pivot so quickly to joy. But cart tracks open, markets stir, and you seize the first chance to salvage hope. The laird dispatches you to lowland fairs with 2 scrawny cows and a cart of smoked fish, bargaining for seed oats, iron nails, and a single hand press promised by an Edinburgh bookseller who fled the city riots. You return with less than you prayed for, but more than you feared enough to spark rebuilding. The press, a squat wooden contraption smelling of lampblack and sweat, becomes the glen's new anvil. Each evening, you set movable type Gaelic and English side by side, printing broadsheets pleading for grain donations, notices coordinating shared plowing teams, psalm lyrics meant to knit frayed spirits. Children gather scraps as they fall, using backwards letters to stamp mud pies. Elders trace each line aloud, savoring the rasp of inked wood on paper. Where muskets once thundered, a printing bar now clacks steady as a loom, weaving community from battered fragments. Yet scars map every hillside, Half the clan's arable plots lie fallow, pocked with craters where cannon mired and exploded. The healer can name burial mounds by battle date. You spend afternoons mending stone dikes toppled by cavalry, evenings straightening bent scythe blades, nights drafting broadsides urging neighbors to share orphaned lambs and spare roofing slates. Recovery, you discover, is less a sunrise than a slow thaw, drip by patient drip. One dawn you stand on the highest tor, eyes tracking sunlight as it spills across patchwork fields. Scars? Certainly, but also rows of new barley already knee-high. A herd of shaggy calves noses a burned stump, sprouting fresh shoots. Below, smoke rises from both the layered stone mansion and the old turf hall. Twins at last in a single skyline. The minister rings a bell, not for warning, but for weddings postponed by war. And from the schoolhouse eaves floats the mingled sound of alphabets, Latin declensions, English grammar drills, Gaelic lullabies recast as practice sentences. The bridge you carried to Edinburgh has stretched home, plank by plank. That evening, at a modest feast of bannocks and nettle ale, the laird asks you to read a new broadside, a pledge signed by every household to rebuild the communal mill first, before personal barns. You read the English version, then flip the page and speak the Gaelic. When you finish, silence settles. Then spoons tap wooden bowls in quiet applause, tinny, imperfect, yet full of will. In their eyes you see a truth war could not burn. The clan is no longer just blood or tartan, but a circle of chores shared, verses traded, plows repaired, songs carried across languages, across ashes, across seasons. Later, you walk the lane where muskets once lined ditch edges. Fireflies pulse among thistles, mirroring stars above. Between them drifts the faint scent of peat smoke returning to ordinary duty. Warming, not warning. You breathe deep, shoulders unclenched for the first time in years, and realize the land has taught you a final lesson. Invasion sears, famine hollows, civil war sunders, but resilience is built of smaller fires, kept alive in hearths, presses, classrooms, and the beds of furrows you refuse to abandon. Tomorrow you will rise, shoulder a spade instead of a satchel, and plant again. And when bells ring across the glen, they will echo not surrender, not command, but the simple, durable call to keep mending what war left undone, harvest by careful harvest, word by bilingual word, until the hills themselves relearn the sound of uninterrupted summer. You rise before first light, dew soaking the cuffs of your breeks as you stride past the half-rebuilt mill. The wheel creaks, stutters, then catches the burn's new spring surge, one more sign the glen is shrugging off war's long frost. You shoulder a sack of last year's barley to test the gearing. The grindstone hums an even rhythm, and the first flurry of meal dust swirls like dawn-lit pollen. It tastes of continuity, rough, honest, stubborn when you pinch a sample to your tongue. Yet continuity no longer means stillness. Merchants from Perth arrive weekly now, their carts rattling over the turnpike to barter linen thread for fleeces shorn off sheep that only recently replaced the clan's shrunk cattle herds. The laird, wary after ruinous levies, invites them into the stone hall, but keeps his account board propped against the hearth, 2 columns chalked in Gaelic and English so none can claim confusion. You translate, eyes flitting between tongues, converting weights and measures as naturally as turning a Psalter page. What once felt like divided loyalty has become market leverage. Language itself is a currency, and you spend it carefully. With trade humming, the glen renews its appetite for learning. Children crowd the schoolhouse that sprang from war's ashes. Slates balanced on knees, while the dominie drills Latin declensions 1 hour and Highland proverbs the next. He borrows your press for handbills, bring peat for the stove, quills for ink, and for chapbooks of local lore, recast in brisk English couplets, easy to memorize, hard to censor. At dusk, when chores are done, youngsters sidle up to your porch to swap riddles they've printed themselves. What travels on tongues but never tires? You answer, story, and they grin, recognizing the lesson beneath the jest. Summer brings a different sort of visitor surveyors in blue coats, commissioned by Edinburgh to map every acre between Firth and Firth for a grand scheme of improvement. They tap brass rods into pasture, unfurl parchment grids, and speak of draining mosslands to plant flax for linen mills. The laird greets them civilly, yet his gaze drifts toward the ridge where clan graves mound the heather. You guide the surveyors along sheep paths, translating place names whose Gaelic syllables curl like roots around forgotten myths. They jot anglicized approximations, smoothing consonants as if leveling hills, and you feel each mispronunciation tug a thread from the fabric you've fought to mend. One evening, standing over the half-finished map, a surveyor notes that royal coffers now eye the Glen's timber stands for naval masts. He assures you generous compensation, silver pennies again, but you picture the ridge denuded, wind scouring soil you coaxed back to life. Later, by peat-red embers. The healer murmurs a proverb you once printed: cut the forest, lose the rain. No law cites it, yet the wisdom feels older than any charter. You decide the next broadside will feature that line front and center, framed by twin columns so even city clerks can't miss its warning. The press clacks through harvest, spitting pages that travel farther than drovers ever could. Copies reach Inverness, Stirling, even Glasgow coffee houses where philosophers debate empire and liberty. A pamphleteer reprints your proverb in a treatise on protecting common woods. He credits an anonymous Highland correspondent. And for the first time, you watch your words step onto a stage you cannot see. It is exhilarating and unsettling. If ink can leap beyond the glen, so can edicts inked by strangers. Indeed. New statutes soon gallop north. One standardizes parish schools under English-only curricula. Another taxes homes with more than 2 hearths, pressing even modest crofts toward consolidation. Whispers of a deeper union with England stir tavern talk. Some foresee bigger markets. Others smell another form of siege. The laird gathers elders, parchment spread like battle plans, and turns to you for the latest pamphlets. Your desk floods with petitions, some urging resistance, others pleading compliance, all angling for your press's persuasive bite. You choose instead to print dialogue, a fictive debate between a lowland trader and a highland shepherd, each arguing roads, rents, and language until they find shared ground in the need for fair grain weights and honest coin. The piece circulates as quickly as any rabble-rousing screed, but it offers no enemy to chase only questions that nag. In alehouses, men quote lines back at one another, half laughing, half unsure which side they favor. You smile conversation, like seed, germinates best in unsettled soil. That winter, snow arrives early, draping the surveyor's boundary stakes in white so clean it looks merciful. Inside the turf hall, now museum and meeting room, you host a cailid that threads new fiddle reels into ancient laments. A young piper, freshly returned from an apprenticeship in Dundee, unveils a tune blending lowland dance rhythms with highland grace notes. Feet stomp, shawls whirl, and for a heartbeat, culture feels less like a fortress and more like a bridge constantly under construction timbers creaking, but spanning the chasm all the same. Still, you lie awake that night, the melody circling your mind alongside tally sheets that refuse to balance. War left debts. Trade brings taxes. Surveys threaten evictions. pressures tightening like a hoop around a cask. You recall your own vow beneath moonlit pines to keep the bridge sturdy. Bridges, you know, require piers sunk deep and arches that flex. So at dawn, you ink a new flyer offering classes in double-entry bookkeeping to crofters and drovers alike. Tools to navigate an economy no claymore can cleave. If laws push change, knowledge can choose the direction. By midsummer, ledgers replace oral tallies across the glen. Women who once bartered eggs for yarn now calculate interest on shared seed loans. Herders record lamb survival rates to haggle higher prices. Numbers join words as shields. When a lowland factor tries docking payment over shrinkage, a shepherd produces weight logs signed by neutral witnesses. Coins jingle where fury might have flared, and the factor rides off frowning, his balance sheet defeated. Yet not every ledger averts loss. Families with thin holdings still drift toward mill towns, lured by weekly wages, fleeing rents they can't meet even with clever arithmetic. Each parting carves a quieter hollow in Xylig circles. You print broadsides listing names and destinations so kin can write letters another bridge. Ink spanning miles, steel cannot. Sometimes replies return pages smelling of coal smoke describing crowded tenements and Sunday strolls along river quays. Proof that identity bends, does not shatter. When transplanted, one crisp autumn morning, news reaches the glen that Parliament has signed the Acts of Union. Church bells toll, not in celebration, not in mourning, but an ambiguous peal that seems to ask, now what? You climb the ridge where peat still dries in stooks and unfurl the parchment copy delivered by courier. 2 crowns now share one banner. 2 parliaments fold into one, and tariffs vanish like mist. The text says nothing of the moss you healed, the proverbs you printed, the bridge you vowed to guard. But you notice a clause preserving Scotland's church and another promising educational latitude. Small footholds, perhaps, yet footholds nonetheless. That night, you feed fresh type into the press and compose your most careful broadside yet. No proclamations, no protests, only questions. How will a shared market weigh wool from storm-bitten hills? What tongue will lullabies adopt in factories by the Clyde? Who tends graves when glens export their young? You print the Gaelic and English in alternating lines, forcing readers' eyes to hopscotch between, to feel the joining. At the foot, you add a pledge wherever the road curves. This press will keep both voices ink-bright and legible. You tack the sheet to the kirk door before sunrise, ink barely dry, and step back. Mist drifts through the yard, blurring the letters for a breath, then lifting to reveal them clearer than before. A sparrow lands on the lintel, chirps, and flits away. You watch it disappear over fields that tomorrow will welcome surveyors, traders, maybe even tax collectors' fields that will still need sowing. Still heed songs calibrated to their winds. Turning homeward, you feel the rhythm of the rebuilt mill hum beneath your boots, steady as heartbeats, promising flour, bread, resilience. The bridge holds. Your watch continues. Morning frost purls along the newly laid military road, each bead catching pale sun like a warning. You watch red-coated engineers pace its gravel spine, measuring progress in King George's yards while the laird's sheep scatter to either verge. The mapmen claim the route will speed drovers to southern markets. The sergeant mutters it will speed cannon to rebellious glens. Both are right, and that double truth sits heavy in your gut as you shoulder a bundle of freshly printed broadsheets. Today's load of words to balance tomorrow's load of muskets. Since the Union, a single calendar page seems to carry a decade's change. excisemen tracking illicit whiskey stills, lowland factors leasing pasture to South-Uist herders, visiting evangelicals preaching in English yet humming psalm tunes suspiciously close to pibroch. Your press keeps pace, clacking out receipts, almanacs, and bilingual catechisms. But every month a new proclamation arrives demanding another concession. Malt taxes doubled, export duties tweaked, oaths of loyalty renewed. You print the edicts because refusing risks shuttering the shop, then print glosses in Gaelic that explain which loopholes remain. Bridging, always bridging, though the planks now tremble beneath marching boots. It's a mild April evening when rumor leaps the heather. The old pretender's son has landed in the west, brandishing Stuart silk and promises of restored Gaelic grandeur. Young men gather in the turf hall, eyes lit with the same fire that once glinted off Wallace's blade in folk tales. They look to you part teacher, part witness to weigh scripture against rebellion. You recite the costs printed on history's ledger famine. Scorched fields, exile fleets, yet as pipes keen a rebel air outside. You remember your own pulse quickening at songs of Bannockburn, the healer's proverb. Every choice breaks a branch in some direction echoes as you watch the lads knot white cockades to bonnets and slip into dusk. The rising grows like bracken after rain swift, wild, hard to uproot. Your press, neutral by vow, strains under conflicting orders, Jacobite broadsides on clandestine nights. Government proclamations by daylight. Each sheet carries risk, but ink is your only weapon. So you wield it, when the young pretender's column marches past with French gold jingling in carts. You stand beside the laird at the gate. He offers no men, no cattle, just a courteous nod that angers both prince and king, but perhaps spares the glen a torch. Winter catches the rebellion at Culloden's drenched moor, an ending so brutal even seasoned drovers blench describing it. Survivors limp home wrapped in bloodied plaid. Many never arrive. A fortnight later, dragoons thunder into the valley, reading the Disarming Act, the Dress Act, the Oath of Abjuration. They stack confiscated dirks like kindling, seize bagpipes as instruments of war, and nail English-only notices to the kirk door. One officer orders your press inspected. He smears a finger through fresh ink and warns that seditious type will earn a noose. You nod, hands steady, though your knees soften like wet peat. Dread, however, proves a poor jailer for culture. At night, families unroll hidden tartan scraps, tiny as pocket handkerchiefs, to remind children of colors once worn openly. The piper's chanter, buried beneath a buyer's straw, surfaces for secret weddings. Your press, under watch, turns to printing innocuous seed catalogs, with musical notation disguised in margins. A single broadsheet lists row spacing for kale. Every third letter, read vertically, spells an old clan motto. The redcoats never notice, and the glen passes songs like contraband seeds, tucked into palm and memory. Then the clearances unfurl, slow and cold as coastal fog. Lowland investors, eyeing mutton profits, pressure chiefs to replace tenants with Cheviot sheep. The laird fights valuation courts, waving ledgers you helped compile, proving barley yields and wool tallies. But gold outvotes ink. Eviction notices arrive stamped with wax as red as arterial blood. Families load creaking carts, spinning wheels, seed chests, psalm books, and file toward sea lanes or factory towns. You print passenger manifests for ships bound to Nova Scotia, Cape Breton, Carolina, each name a syllable clipped from the glen's lifelong sentence. On the dock at Ullapool, you watch a friend's daughter press her palm to the psalter you once lent her father. She promises to sing its hymns across the Atlantic and plant heather in foreign soil. You answer with a folded pamphlet, dual-column tales of Ben Nevis winters and Selkie myths inked proof that her tongue carries a homeland no landlord can foreclose. The ship's anchor clanks. Gulls wheel. When the sails bloom white against slate sky, you taste salt and ink on your lips. Indistinguishable. Back home, absence echoes louder than cannon. Entire straths lie silent but for sheep tearing at coarse grass. Yet emptiness breeds new resolve. Women left behind spin surplus wool into fine worsted. You help negotiate contracts with Glasgow merchants who disdain plaid but prize yardage. Boys too young for muskets learn lathe work, reshaping oak into bobbins for Paisley mills. The press prints instruction sheets, English on front for inspectors, Gaelic on back for kin. Slowly, coin trickles where rents once bled, and the laird uses each shilling to buy forfeited crofts, reletting them on humane terms, fields traded for loyalty instead of fear. Years pass. The military road, once a symbol of conquest, becomes a trade artery, humming with carts of Highland whiskey legal, now after savvy lobbying by lowland investors. You bottle the Glen's first licensed batch, designing labels that feature both Latin motto and Gaelic verse. Inspectors approve. Customers in Edinburgh find the foreign characters exotic, almost romantic. You smile at the irony letters once banned now sell spirits by the case. One autumn festival you stage a public Caillead legal, licensed, and loudly advertised. Dragoons still patrol, but pause at the edge of torchlight, helmets tilted as they listen to a piper, yes, openly skirl a tune that blends marches with waltzes. Couples whirl in tartan revived more as fashion than defiance. The healer, hair silver now, hands out pamphlets on crop rotation and first aid herbs. You dance too, feeling the bridge beneath your feet, not a fragile span this time, but a layered causeway stone, timber, iron, and ink. Near midnight, the laird pulls you aside. He holds a letter from Nova Scotia, pages soft from sea air, penned by that same daughter. She writes of clearing land where spruce smells faintly of Scots pine, of teaching her children to spell both harbor and harbor, of reading your psalter by whale oil lamp. Enclosed is a clipping from a Halifax newspaper, an advertisement for a Highland concert featuring immigrant fiddlers. Proceeds to fund a bilingual school. The laird's voice breaks as he reads her final line. Tell them the songs bloom here too. You return to the press at dawn, set fresh type, and print her words in large, bold capitals, English top. Gaelic beneath surrounding them with a border of knotwork and maple leaves. The broadsheet circulates from kirk door to alehouse, sails down the new mail coach to Inverness, drifts across desks in London where clerks puzzle at its bilingual boast. Some shrug, but others pin it to notice boards. Charmed by resilience they can't quite parse. Standing outside the mill, you watch smoke from its chimney mingle with morning mist, and you realize the bridge you vowed to guard has grown beyond timber and language. It stretches across oceans now, stitched by migration and trade, notes and ledgers, defeat and reinvention. Empires may redraw borders, statutes may mute tongues, clearances may empty glens, but as long as ink dries and voices carry, paths endure. You scoop a handful of barley meal from the hopper. Let it sift through your fingers. And think of ships leaving tomorrow, roads unfurling east, presses clacking in Halifax. Somewhere a child will learn her grandsire's proverb beside a foreign hearth. Pronounce the words with a lilt bent by waves, and still the meaning will stand. You smile, shoulder another sack for the mill, and step forward, grain to grind. Pages to set, bridges to extend into whatever dawn comes next. Dawn stains the Cairngorm peaks crimson as you nudge the mill wheel into motion. grateful that muscle memory still outruns age. A gull circles overhead, rare this far inland, and its cry reminds you of harbors half a world away. The letter you received last night sits folded in your breast pocket, its paper thinner than oat chaff, its ink smelling faintly of spruce resin. Your Nova Scotia kin are coming home, at least for a season. 3 generations removed from peat fires. They plan to cross the breadth of an industrial ocean aboard a steamship that eats coal by the ton and outruns every memory of the sailing vessels that carried their ancestors out. While the grindstone hums, you rehearse greetings in both tongues, rolling consonants that once fell from young lips with ease. Age has roughened their edges, but the words still glow hot in the forge of your chest. Visitors these days expect duality Gaelic for ceremony, English for commerce, and you have spent decades making the handoff appear seamless. Still, you wonder whether the diaspora cousins will hear music or museum pieces when you speak. Noon finds you at the railway halt, a modest timber platform grafted onto the military road's old spine. Iron tracks gleam like pen strokes across heather, while the telegraph wire above hums with news too quick for horse or pigeon. Industrialists promised these rails would tether Highland wool to global looms, yet the first cargo cars carried more families south than fleeces. Now the train whistles in reverse tourists chasing authentic Highland air, scholars hunting vowel sounds thought extinct, emigres thirsting for the taste of ancestral water. The locomotive exhales a cloud that smells of furnace soot and faraway cities. From second-class coaches step your Canadian cousins' shawls bright with maple leaf reds, eyes the same flint green you see in the burn on clear mornings. They carry grip sacks, sheet music scrolls, a boxed fiddle, and a camera whose brass lens glints like new coin. When you lift the youngest lass in an embrace, she presses a printed booklet into your hand, the Highland Readers, Halifax edition, bilingual like the broadsheets you once hid from dragoons. Your chest tightens ink. It seems, has followed the same migratory paths as blood. You lead them past sheep-nibbled slopes toward the village, where corrugated iron roofs now mingle with thatch and slate. Steam plows idle beside wooden ards. Kerosene lamps hang in doorways where rushlights once sputtered. Progress has arrived piecemeal, like mail dropped along a winding route. In the renovated turf hall, part museum, part community school, you unroll a wall map. Scarlet pins mark immigrant settlements in Cape Breton, Patagonia, Otago. The visiting cousins add blue tacks for second-wave descendants in Detroit, Sydney, Buenos Aires. The map begins to look like constellations finally realigning. Evening brings a Kylie, advertised by posters that spun off your press in crisp serif one side, braided Gaelic script the other. Villagers crowd beneath oil lamps strung between rafters hewn centuries ago. A lowland violinist and a sailor from Glasgow's docks join the Canadian fiddler, stitching reels with ragtime until feet stamp out a beat older than the floorboards. Between sets, you stand beside a historian who arrived by bicycle to study the clearances. She marvels that villagers greet her questions with ledgers. Not laments proof, she says. That written memory outlived the landlord's torches. You point to the press in the corner. Still oiled. Still ready. Its metal letters glint like teeth in candlelight. The next morning, the cousins hike toward the ridge where forestry agents once threatened to harvest every pine. Now, those slopes host a cooperative of crofters planting native saplings alongside experimental apple orchards. Their grafting knives as deft as any silversmith's chisel. You helped draft the Coop's charter, an article in Gaelic guaranteeing each family a vote, an appendix in English satisfying Inverness solicitors. The visitors photograph the saplings. promising to send seedlings of cold hardy Nova Scotia varieties in return. Trade, you realize, has grown circular timber once felled for empire, now returns as fruit for local pies. Back at the mill, a delivery cart. Waits crates stamped with a London bookseller's crest. Inside, you find freshly printed volumes, a dual-language anthology titled Voices Over the Brae, your adolescent poems. First set in clandestine margins. Now sit beside essays on hydropower and ballads recorded on wax cylinders. The preface credits an anonymous pressman who bridged words across centuries. Heat rushes to your cheeks. Anonymity used to shield you. Now it feels like a borrowed cloak grown too small. You set the book on the windowsill, where dust motes flicker across its gilded title. Then step outside to clear your head in wind blown straight off the Nordic swells. Fields shimmer gold under a sun that once scorched armies and scorched again through neglect. Steam threshers clatter where hand flails used to thud. Yet the newer machines pause at dusk, so neighbors can glean tradition's handful ritual strands, braided into harvest knots hung above hearths against misfortune. Children of factory weavers gather stooks for a bonfire that will light the Equinox Festival revived last year by the school. The headmaster, fluent in both code and catechism. Printed tickets on your press with a tiny QR cipher tucked beneath the Gaelic motto, a gate for smartphones to enter what peat fires began. As twilight bleeds into indigo, the diaspora cousins climb the watch hill with you. Below, the glen flickers incandescent bulbs in window sashes, peat fires in great mouths, LED fairy lights along the kirk's eaves. You unroll a draft of tomorrow's broadside, a call for funding to convert the abandoned excise depot into a community archive and fiber art studio. The headline reads in sturdy block English. The subtitle curls in whispering Gaelic. The Canadians lean close, sounding out each vowel. Their accents tilt transatlantic, but the intent rings true. They sign their names beneath the pledge, adding dollars that will convert into pounds before morning. Wind ruffles the paper, and you anchor it with a stone. Memory, money, muscle each has played its part, but paper, you muse, remains the quiet hero, pliable yet persistent. You recall wartime leaflets, tenant lists, seed loans, smuggled tunes, children's riddles. Every sheet was a stepping stone across change, fragile yet firm enough for the next footfall. The press below still waits. Gears greased, type sorted, ready to answer tomorrow's clamor with balanced columns and honest ink. Stars prick the high vault, mirroring new electric lights in the valley. One cousin lifts her camera. The shutter clicks, trapping this hinge moment between flash and dark. You close your eyes, hear the soft thrum of the mill wheel, the distant whistle of the evening train, the bilingual chatter drifting up the slope. It sounds like a loom weaving timeline's warp of heritage. Weft of innovation into cloth no tax or tyrant can rend. You open your eyes to the night, to the gathered family spanning oceans and ages, and feel a stillness settle in your bones, not the silence of surrender, but the pause of a scribe dipping his quill, readying the next line. Down in the hall, ink warms on the stove. Tomorrow the press will breathe again. Story, statute, seed chart, song sheet pages flying outward as steadfast as migrating geese, always circling back, always carrying forward. You tighten your cloak, press the broadside flat, and lead the way downhill. Footsteps sure on a path your words helped pave, toward a dawn busy sharpening its quills for chapters yet unwritten. So, that's our journey from windswept highland moss to steam-whistled valleys. From whispered clan oaths to bilingual broadsheets, that still bridge oceans today. If any moment struck you an outlaw's midnight raid, a grandmother's hidden proverb, a ship's lantern winking across the Atlantic, drop it in the comments below so everyone can see which echoes of Scotland still ring in your corner of the world. While you're there, tell us what time it is where you're watching. The map of our little community gets brighter with every pin you add. Thanks for staying up with history tonight. Now dim the screen, settle in, and may your dreams be as sturdy as a Highland mill wheel. Good night, friends.